My name is Dot Kelly. I'm an engagement manager at AM. I work with librarians, faculty, students, all trying to integrate our collections into teaching and research at your institutions. Now, first things first, I do have a little housekeeping. So please do note that today's webinar is being recorded. By remaining in our meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. That's a good thing though, as obviously the recording from last week has been particularly helpful. And that will be sent to you automatically once the webinar finishes. So if there are any details that you've missed or anything you'd like to remind yourself of later in the year, you've got that recording stored safely in your inbox. And I would also note that everybody apart from my wonderful band of panelists is actually muted at the moment. If you do have questions, you have the questions function, and we also have a chat function as part of your GoToWebinar setup. So you should be able to communicate through that. If you feel like you're issuing any technical issues throughout this webinar, please do send us a message on that chat function and I'll do everything I can to help you out. And then finally, I've got some time dedicated at the end of the webinar specifically so that my panelists can answer questions. And please do feel free to ask those questions throughout and we will go through everything towards the end. Whilst I mention technical issues, I will just pause here and say one of the issues that people quite frequently have with GoToWebinar is having accidentally joined without audio. If you are struggling with your audio at any point, I would recommend rejoining and double checking your audio selections at the entry point. I am hoping that if anybody can't hear me right now, will be able to read those pictures on the screen and get the idea to jump back in with some sound. Now, if this is your first time attending our Publishing In webinar or your first time encountering AM, we create digital collections and technology platforms that enrich the study, research and teaching of primary sources. As a company, we are incredibly proud to work with many of the world's leading libraries and archives and research institutions and make their materials available online to the scholarly community. These strong partnerships are really at the heart of all of our resources. And we work with curators, archivists, conservators, licensing teams and collection heads to try and understand the content and the nuance of every archive that we digitize. We also build a bespoke editorial board of experts and scholars for each and every project so that we're working really closely with both the primary sources and also those people who preserve, catalogue, protect and use them at the end of the day. Now, I've got 6 incredible members of our editorial team here with me today who do this work on a daily basis. And each of them is going to be talking to you about a project that they have been working on very recently. As I mentioned, we have 6 incredible collections to talk to you about today. 4 of these are brand new resources and they cover content that you will not have seen in any other AM collection. And 2 of them are a continuation of our incredibly popular collections, East India Company records, and then also the long-awaited Apartheid South Africa, taking that collection past the 1980s. So, I'll save my introduction for each individual collection and each editor, but suffice to say we have some incredible content to highlight for you today, and I think it's probably best that we just jump straight in. So first up, I will introduce Sophie Davis. Sophie is a development editor from AM. She's been with us since 2018, leading the company's Colonial Caribbean and East India Company resources. She also worked on the project Broadcasting America. She is currently developing a multitude of future projects stretching across the globe, looking at sources from Australia, Canada, India, Ireland, and South Africa, and the UK and the US as well. And she's going to be talking to us about Apartheid South Africa, the new section, which covers 1981 through to 1988. Sophie, I'm going to hand over my controls of my keyboard and mouse to you. But I know that people have been asking, certainly me, and I imagine you for quite a while now, about the idea of getting some 1980s content into Apartheid South Africa. So please tell us more.
Thank you, Dot. Yeah, so hi everyone, I am Sophie Davis, and as Dot very kindly introduced, I'm the development lead for the Apartheid South Africa resource. So 2024 sees the release of our latest module of our extensive portal, and this particular one is called Resistance, Sanctions and Reform, covering the years 1981 to 1988. Okay, so this is the latest module in our Archives Direct portal. So it's covering the apartheid period from start to finish, continuing to build a comprehensive guide to the UK and South Africa's relationship during the regime. So this is actually the first of two modules, which continues the story of the end of the apartheid era in Southern Africa. And this is sourced exclusively from the National Archives that is based in the UK. So it's also the first resource to be released on the Archive Direct resources under its separate stream. So following on from our last module in 1980, this covers the start of the latter years of the apartheid regime, and this is through the lens of British government files from 81 to 88. You'll be able to study the UK's government's position and role during apartheid through content on sanctions, embargoes, humanitarian issues, opportunities and support for Black South Africans in the UK, reports on segregated society in South Africa, and business links between the UK and South Africa. Okay, so what can you expect to see in the resource? So this is obviously in addition to what's already in the portal as it presently stands. We'll be introducing a range of essays to contextualise this period of upheaval. So this is going to include an overview of the internal situation in South Africa and of course its neighbouring states. We should remember that while apartheid was predominantly in South Africa, it did affect some of the countries that surrounded it. We're also going to include another essay that's due to explore the various international movements against apartheid. In addition to this, we're going to have our usual searching guides, which will allow the user to explore the language guidelines, providing very important contextual details on outdated language and terms previously used to address cultures within the existing metadata. Some of the material that we've included is scanned from very large files, which contain, as you can imagine, a treasure trove of documents. So this includes correspondence. Now, this correspondence can incorporate internal governmental letters. This will have letters to and from members of the public. This is also to and from campaign organisations. So this could be NGOs, the IMF, and also potentially the UN. There's also to and from foreign officials in the South African government. Other items also include reports from many organisations. So again, we raised the UN and the IMF before, but also including the anti-apartheid movement, as well as various memos, parliamentary records, clippings, articles and newspapers. Now, I've given you a taste of some of the key themes here, but let's just break them down. So the crisis in the South African economy, of course, the formation in 1982 of the Conservative Party, which is very much to the right of the ruling National Party, and an electoral threat. It is then the formation in 1983 of the United Democratic Front, which reintroduced mass popular opposition to apartheid. The securitization of the state with the military influence in government, and this is greatly enhanced under President P.W. Botha and the creation of the elaborate National Security Management System. There's then Botha's Rubicon speech of 1985 and violent and protracted confrontation between opposition activists and the security forces. So let's have a look at some of the highlights and narratives that we can present to you. And I think this first one is the most exciting, and the reason that this is finally arriving actually in addition to the three modules that previously exist for this. So one, the National Archives have recently released documents, which is why we're only able to produce this now. And this is a really exciting offering to everyone because this is the first time researchers will be able to access this material. They've very unlikely not been able to access this in the archive before. And within these newly released files, users will be able to explore international sanctions that the formal end of apartheid was achieved through, through various internal economic pressure and diplomacy. There's significant value in a project which offers an angle of international diplomacy, and this earlier module focuses on sanctions and exploring the various countries' approaches to these sanctions. Now, part of this is seen through activist and grassroots group activity. Now, we obviously should be transparent. Of course, this is British government documents, and there is a limitation in the viewpoints that are available to us. But we should highlight that these documents contain ephemeral material and plenty of correspondence from activist groups, such as the anti-apartheid movement that I raised earlier, and also particularly from correspondence from members of the British public. And I think this can be used to gain a really important insight into the grassroots work and on wider public opinion of apartheid in the UK. The letters from the public are particularly insightful. I think you can see there's a picture here that I think has come from children in primary schools that would, you know, send this towards Margaret Thatcher at the time. And I think looking at their opinions and the mass public support for economic sanctions, and this is really interesting when we then look at that to Thatcher's documents. Now, of course, the major collection within this module is the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Southern African Department. This is collection FCO 105. And the primary focus during this period for the department was apartheid. The department recorded correspondence between government ministers, foreign officials, international bodies, anti-apartheid political and grassroots groups, and members of the public on various matters of apartheid. The content includes things such as the UN trade and arms embargo and sanctions, the expulsion of South Africa from international organisations, South Africans seeking political asylum in the UK, and anti-apartheid and liberation movements in South Africa, as well as assistance to British subjects in South Africa. Also looks at the South African economy and business and education, and UN General Assembly sessions on the matter, and various policies towards South Africa. And in addition to this, the material look at Botswana, Lesotho, Malawi, Namibia, and Swaziland. So, of course, as we raised earlier, it's important to note it wasn't just South Africa itself that was affected. And this sits well alongside selective items we're taking from smaller collections, and one of these is Prem 19, the Prime Minister's Office. So this covers Thatcher's perspective on ongoing sanctions. Now, the UK's role was obviously quite interesting here, as Thatcher was opposed to apartheid, but also resisted sanctions for reasons of economic liberalism. So this means the perspective offered from the British government files is incredibly and highly valuable to the subject area. So thank you. I hope that's given you a good taste of apartheid South Africa, and I will move on to the next person.
Great, thank you ever so much, Sophie. And obviously, Apartheid South Africa will be going on to the newest version of our platform, as well as all of Archives Direct has recently moved onto that platform. If you haven't had a chance to dive back into any of the Archives Direct collections that you already own, then I would suggest that you make some time to do that as soon as possible, because they really do look absolutely fantastic. Okay. So next up, we have Eleanor Cambridge. Eleanor is an assistant editor at AM. Now, she has worked on a range of our products so far, including Africa and the New Imperialism, the Amnesty International Archives, and most recently, the East India Company Office Records, Section F. So prior to joining AM, Eleanor's focus really was on the academic focus. Academic focus was on the history of book and print culture, and she is going to talk to us now. Eleanor, I'm just going to give you control of my mouse, and you should be able to.
Thanks, Dot. So, as Dot said, my name is Eleanor Cambridge, and I have been the lead editor on the East India Company India Office Records F, the Board of Commissioners and Establishment of the Board, which is Module 6 of the East India Company collection. There we go. So in order to understand where the F series sits within the India Office Records, I'll just briefly give you an overview of how the East India Company was set up. So the East India Company was first established in 1600 and was a major territorial power in India by the latter half of the 18th century. The political influence it exerted meant that in 1784, the British government instituted standing commissioners known as the Board of Commissioners or the Board of Control, depending on the record you're referring to. Based in London, they were tasked with exercising supervision over the company's Indian policies. The company continued to exercise responsibility for the government of India until the reorganisation of 1858, and the Board of Control supervised the official correspondence of the company with its Indian presidencies. Contained within IORF, or India Office Records F, are the board's minutes, home correspondence and draft dispatches submitted by the company for approval. The board supervised the proceedings of the company in all matters of administration and approved the company's dispatches to India, with the power to alter them as they saw fit. It could also send its own dispatches with the EIC Court of Directors, who were obliged to sign them and send them to India. Originally, the board consisted of 6 commissioners, including Secretary of State, Chancellor of the Exchequer, plus 4 other Privy Councillors, and from 1793 it had a permanent president. This is the first module of IORF. It will be split into 4 modules overall. And it contains in the first module 806,500 images, which have been made fully searchable through the handwritten text recognition process of HTR. There are 1,257 documents focusing on the early years of the board, including 18 indexes. There are dispatches and drafts containing the nuances of the decision-making that was being sent out from the metropole, while financial documents offer insight into taxation and compensation. There are also numerous claims that are made for damages caused by the wars in different regions across India, and employees and their families frequently write in to establish who has the right to claim pensions. As you can see on the slide, maps were commissioned and sent back to London to show the newest territories that had been acquired by the company. This map is of the island of Salsette, which was first occupied by British forces in 1774, which is located in contemporary Bombay, or as it's known now, Mumbai. An interesting point of note for this map is that the crosses that can be seen at various points are actually Portuguese churches from the previous Portuguese occupation. So I wanted to draw out some areas of interest. The collection is vast for IORF, and these are just a few of my personal highlights from the collection. Documents frequently discuss negotiations between the company and the rulers of the princely states, with deaths and the resulting inheritances recorded meticulously by the company, some of which actually include family trees to justify why an elder son may not have inherited from his father. And it will be really interesting to see what people can find in those documents. I know some academics who've seen the material already are really excited by what they found there. Cholera outbreaks are a recurring issue for the EIC. Major cities like Bombay or modern-day Mumbai and Madras or modern-day Chennai all suffer huge loss of human lives. The disease kills thousands of company soldiers and unrecorded numbers of the indigenous population. Inoculation is promoted and invested in by the company, with information about preventing the disease being translated into local languages, and we have the approvals coming from the Board of Control for that to go ahead. Religion is also a contentious subject within the documents. There are references to a cholera deity that was being reported by a Catholic vicar to the board, who discovered labourers believed in this deity despite being quote unquote Christian. And there are also discussions about the Hindu and Muslim faiths, as well as different Christian denominations and how they are living alongside each other in their communities. The picture on the slide is the beginning of a series of correspondence with a Scottish ecclesiastical chaplain and the EIC about erecting churches in Calcutta. We also have a huge amount of additional content alongside the documents. New essays have been commissioned, including a piece discussing the EIC's impact on the environment, particularly focusing on Singapore and Malaysia and the ill-fated attempts at farming crops there. There is an interactive chronology and government structure chart, which allows users to navigate who was a member of the board at what time, and therefore what decisions they were involved in making. And as I mentioned before, the material is fully searchable through HTR. We also have updated our alternative place names guide to offer new search terms for different cities, as for example with Bombay and Mumbai. I've been working on the EIC collection for a year now, and I'm really excited to be able to share this with everyone. It's got some incredible details that I think haven't been properly explored yet. So Dot, I will hand back to you.
Thank you ever so much, Eleanor. I know I probably speak for a number of our customers who really love the East India Company collections, and we see it used in so many different and interesting ways as well. I'm going to move swiftly on, and I will introduce you to Mitchell Manners. So, in fact, no, I won't. I will introduce you to Sarah Burse. Apologies. So Sarah is an editor in our production team. She has worked previously on products such as Mass Observation Project, and she is going to talk to us now about one of our new audiovisual collections launching this year, Hindi Cinema, Histories of Filmmaking. Sarah, give me 2 seconds. I will give you control of my mouse and you can take it away.
Thank you, Dot. Yes, my name is Sarah Burse, and I'm an editor in the production team, and I'm really looking forward to introducing you to Hindi Cinema, Histories of Filmmaking. So, Hindi Cinema features original unedited interviews from the private collection of filmmaker and author Nazreen Kabir. The interviews total over 70 hours of footage and feature key figures from Hindi cinema. There are also an additional 7 hours of on-set actuality footage. In addition to the interviews, the resource contains on-set photographs by Peter Chappell and over 130 film posters from the BFI. We're looking forward to publishing Hindi Cinema in April 2024. The interviews offer a unique insight into the Hindi film industry. The earliest interviews come from 1988, when Nazreen Kabir was commissioned to produce Movie Mahal for Channel 4 television. These 2 series played a significant role in introducing British audiences to Indian cinema. The interviews reflect on many aspects of the filmmaking process, including the experiences of those working during the golden age of Hindi cinema. Key figures such as Dev Anand, Shabana Azmi, Dilip Kumar, Ramesh Sippy, Nadira and Laxmikant feature in the Movie Mahal interviews. The interviews continue into the 1990s and 2000s and include raw material from documentaries and series such as In Search of Guru Dutt, How to Make It Big in Bollywood, How to Make a Bollywood Movie, Bollywood Dancing, Bollywood Celebrities and many more. The interviews are in English, Hindi and Urdu. All the interviews will play in their original language with English closed captions and transcripts available. The Hindi and Urdu interviews will also feature original language transcripts. The content of the interviews are fully site searchable and are supported with rich metadata, increasing their browsability. Key topics covered in the resource include filmmaking and direction, music and song, dance and choreography, cultural and regional perspectives, gender roles and women in film, storytelling and script writing, as well as socio-political commentary. To provide context for the rich primary resources, the resource also features a video interview with Nazreen Kabir, contextual essays, a timeline situating Hindi cinema in wider Indian cinematic traditions, series guides introducing the original framework for the interviews and highlighting key figures, search categories which allow the user to browse by lists of directors, films and songs, and a searching guide which supports the user's pathways into the material. The interviews are engaging and fascinating. As well as hearing from prominent figures like key directors and actors, the user can explore less public figures such as choreographers, costume designers, lyricists, composers and film critics. This image comes from an interview with Vedia Rahman focusing on Guru Dutt. This is from 4.5 hours of interviews in the In Search of Guru Dutt series, which feature 12 interview subjects. This interview with Reheman reflects on her experience working with Guru Dutt, particularly on Piyasa. She reflects on his character, style of direction, and his support of actors and colleagues. There are then also other interviews with Reheman from the 2000s, which allow a researcher to engage with her views and memories at different points in her career. Hindi cinema is such a rich resource to work on, and it really is a jewel in terms of its content. We're really excited to make this unique collection available, and I can't wait to see how it's used by the scholarly community. So thank you for letting me talk about it today, and I will hand back over to Dot.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm just going to take a second to say if anybody has any questions for Eleanor, Sophie or Sarah so far about the products that we've already discussed, please do feel free to pop those into the questions section of GoToWebinar, or you could always use the chat as well if you would rather. Okay. I introduced him before, but now I will actually let him speak. Mitchell Manners, who joined us around about a year and a half ago, has been working on the Olympic movement, sport, global politics and identity for quite some time now. So Mitchell, please do tell us more.
Wonderful, thanks very much, Dot. And hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. As Dot mentioned, my name is Mitchell Manners and I'm a development editor at AM. And I'm very happy to introduce today our upcoming resource, the Olympic movement, sport, global politics and identity. So this exciting multi-archive resource is a foray for us into a new research area, the area of sport history. It will cover the development of the modern Olympic Games, telling the story of the world's biggest sporting event through primary sources. Starting with writings of key figures like Pierre de Coubertin, Avery Brundage and other Olympic officials, and spanning across the 20th century with documents from each Olympic Games, the collection invites users to examine the original ideologies behind the Olympic movement and charts the progressive transition to the events that we know today. The material in the resource has been sourced from 6 international archives, the Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee Archives, World Ability Sport and Buckinghamshire Archive, the British Film Institute, and the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum. So this slide shows just a sample of the rich interdisciplinary themes that users will be able to explore through this resource. And over the next few minutes, I'll give a brief introduction to the material itself, which can be found in the collection and that will speak to each of these themes. Some of the key documents within the resource include the official records, reports and meeting minutes from major sporting organisations like the International Olympic Committee and various national Olympic committees and sports federations, offering insight and context into the decision-making of these groups. Also included are meeting minutes of the International Stoke Mandeville Games Federation Council, and these document the origins and early development of the event that would become the Paralympics at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire. There's a range of rich correspondence in the form of circular letters, as well as personal and official letters with leading Olympic figures, which depict interactions between Olympic Committee members, national organisations, government bodies, and members of the public during important historical moments like the World Wars, the Cold War, and Apartheid. Personal papers, scrapbooks, and diaries of athletes have been sourced from the US Olympic Committee archives, giving a personal insight into the experiences and narratives of athletes. And we're also very pleased to be including audiovisual content from the BFI and Ronald Reagan Library, with footage of a vast number of games from 1904 to 1984. So diving into some of the specific material, I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss some highlights from the resource. So you'll be able to find extensive documentation of the various boycotts that have been seen throughout modern Olympic history. The political and financial impacts of the boycotting of South Africa due to apartheid, as well as the Cold War era boycotts of the 1980 and 1984 Games, can be studied through the correspondence and personal notebooks of key US Olympic Committee members, such as the former President F. Don Miller, Treasurer Julian K. Roosevelt, and many others. We've also included some highly fragile newspapers in English, Italian, and German from the 1930s. That's before, during, and after the 1936 Berlin Games, providing contemporary accounts of Nazi hostility to Jewish Olympic attendance and the ensuing debate over US participation in the Games. These include 1936 issues of the Brooklyn publication, The Jewish Examiner. These documents are highly used in the original archives at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, but they're very fragile. So our expert digitization and conservation teams will preserve these documents and enable them to be viewed in quality condition. The material also depicts the ways in which countries and organizations at the national and local level worked together to organize each Olympic Games. Throughout the resource, you'll find bids that hopeful cities made to host the Olympics, which often come in beautifully designed and illustrated bound books, showcasing urban spaces, parks, and blueprints for new sporting venues. And this shows the city planning and engineering involved in these major athletic events. Lastly, there are several series in the collection devoted to regional games that expanded the Olympic movement, such as the first African Games in Brazzaville in the Republic of Congo in 1965. This material includes correspondence between the organisers and IOC officials to plan the Games, as well as official guides, programmes and reports. And finally, alongside these archival documents, the resource will include a number of additional features which help to contextualise and open up access to the material. These include biographies of key athletes and Olympic figures, case studies of some of the most important and pivotal Olympic Games, a chronology of the modern Olympic movement, contextual essays, and lastly, thorough indexing and search functionality that will help users to find avenues into the material relating to individuals, organizations, countries, and of course, specific sports. So I really hope you are as excited as we are for the Olympic Movement resource to publish later this year, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you ever so much, Mitchell. And I have to say, if you are interested in content around sport in particular, I would highly recommend checking out our audiovisual collection, Socialism on Film, which has some really interesting examples of sport and sporting achievements from socialist and communist perspectives through films that were created in socialist and communist countries during the 20th century. And that's a wonderful accompaniment there to the Olympic movement. Okay, I'm going to move on here and I'm going to introduce Sophie Phone. So Sophie is a senior development editor. She specialises in commissioning modern history projects. She was the development lead for the transformation of shopping resource, and as well as that, she's also worked on the recently published 1980s Culture and Society and the forthcoming Women's Voices and Life Writing, which was part of last week's webinar. She has an academic background in the history of art and design and worked in museums before joining the publishing sector 8 years ago. Now, Sophie, I am going to hand over control of my mouse to you, and we should be ready to go.
Thank you, Dart. I'm very happy to talk to you today about this resource, which has been in development for many, many years, and we look forward to it publishing later this year. The Transformation of Shopping explores the social and cultural history of shopping, the retail industry, and daily and working life, predominantly through the lens of the department store. As a BBC Culture article recently noted, from Victorian London to Soviet-era Moscow, department stores have changed the way we shop and have shaped global culture. So our resource spans over 140 years of history, showing how department stores adapted to changing consumer needs and expectations over time, with a special focus on the lived experience of the customer. Importantly, department store archives provide ample coverage of other shopping venues. The resource covers the establishment of department stores in the early 19th century, many of which began as mail-order companies, wholesale merchants, or small high street shops. It also traces their development from fixtures on the high street to suburban complexes established after World War II, to central features of shopping malls developed from the 1970s onwards. Resource not only features department store archives, but also trade journals and union records to provide a range of perspectives on the retail industry. It's designed to appeal to undergraduates as well as advanced researchers in social, business and cultural history. This resource will complement and build upon AM's American consumer culture portfolio. It will also appeal to scholars of global history with its broader geographic coverage. So there are 14 archives from over 6 countries featuring in the resource. It includes major department store brands such as Wanamaker's, Lord & Taylor and Selfridges, but also examples of lesser known stores so that users can examine and compare regional stances on race, gender and class. As Dot mentioned earlier, selection and presentation of content is informed by an interdisciplinary editorial board with expertise in the different locations and time periods. So it encompasses several topics. The resource examines the de-skilling of shop work, for example, unionism and the feminisation of retail over the 20th century, as well as the effects of the civil rights movement on the retail industry. And you can see a number of the themes that users can explore on this slide. The appeal of our resource is its coverage of harder to access archival material. The collection is also highly visual. To pick out a few examples from this list, it contains hundreds of photographs of interiors, window displays and events to illustrate how stores changed over time. For business historians, there are annual reports and ledgers, and there is correspondence from customers, including complaints, special requests and thank you cards. So to draw out some highlights, these are a selection of photographs from the Hudson's Bay Company archives, which are held at Archives of Manitoba in Winnipeg. The Hudson's Bay Company is one of the oldest and largest companies to operate department stores in Canada. These photographs date from 1893 to 1956 and feature stores in Vancouver, Montreal and Alberta. We have also included a very unique collection of posters produced by artist Ants Toli for Tallinna Kauppameia, a department store in Estonia. The majority of posters date from the 1980s and so provide a rare and sought-after insight into Soviet consumer culture, offering a counterpoint to materials from capitalist nations and the rest of the collection. Another example are the staff newsletters. These are rich, accessible sources for tracing the social history of the stores. The newsletters shown here are from McEwan's and Anthony Horden & Sons, both department stores in Australia, and the Ken Bar in the centre is a Glaswegian newsletter from the House of Fraser archives. These newsletters are invaluable for tracing personal histories and contain informal anecdotes of staff encounters of customers. Finally, trade journals. These chronicle developments in the industry over time. The example on the left shows the popular US publication, Department Store Management, which covers late 1960s to mid-70s. Now, these journals are typically controlled and produced by those in management. On the right, we have an image from the Shop Assistant, a trade union publication. Our resource features a complete run from the late 19th to mid-20th century, and this title presents an altogether different perspective, covering campaigns for improved wages and working conditions. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the resource, and I'll end it there and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Okay, wonderful. I actually had the pleasure of seeing some of the Noel Butlin archive last time I was down at Australian National University in probably about this time last year, and they have some really fascinating content on trade unions. We do have one more collection to talk to you about, and you are about to hear a particularly familiar voice if you have been able to watch the recording from last week. I will introduce to you Rob Kinsey. Rob is a development editor at AM, and he has worked at AM for almost 6 years. He's worked on a variety of projects, including recently published resources, Life at Sea, and Africa and the New Imperialism. Rob is also introducing to you now Trade in Early Modern London, which he also worked on in development. Rob.
Thank you, Dot. Hello, everyone. So, Trade in Early Modern London is a major 2-module resource for the study of early modern London through the lens of the city's influential livery companies. Delivery companies were organisations of master tradesmen and women that developed out of medieval guilds. Their purpose was to control the number and character of new entrants to their particular trade, as well as providing financial and social support for their members and dependents. Over time, the companies became wealthy property holders in London and beyond, and used this wealth to acquire political influence, making loans to the Crown in exchange for further privileges. Delivery companies were also integral to the city's governance. From the 1430s onwards, the Lord Mayor had to be chosen from amongst the aldermen of the City of London, who themselves had to be members of a livery company. The companies were also patrons of the arts and culture. They erected their own guild halls, endowed churches, and were responsible for organising the annual Lord Mayor Show. The records of the livery companies therefore provide a multitude of insights into the economic, political, social, and cultural history of early modern London. From each of the contributing livery companies, we will be digitising the surviving court minutes and warden's accounts from the earliest date that they survive up to 1750, as well as constitutional records such as charters and ordinances. These records include insights into significant events such as the Reformation, the Civil War, the Great Plague, and the Great Fire of London. But they are also really valuable sources of information on daily life in the city, such as prices and wages, payments for food and drink, and repairs to buildings, and the maintenance of street lighting. These extensive manuscript records will also be fully searchable using our handwritten text recognition software to enable users to find key topics relevant to their particular research. The final lineup of the contributing livery companies will be confirmed shortly, but it will include substantial contributions from several of the Great 12 livery companies, including Goldsmiths Company, Fishmongers Company, and Skinner's Company. For this project, we are also partnering with the London Metropolitan Archives, where many of the early records of the livery companies are now held. Some highlights from the resource include numerous references to churches, workplaces, almshouses, and schools, detailing the daily lives of a large proportion of the city's inhabitants. There are also records documenting the livery company's involvement in the annual Lord Mayor Show, which provide a wealth of detail on civic culture and pageantry, including payments for river barges, banners and clothing, musicians and performers. The resource will also be including some beautifully illuminated manuscripts produced by the companies, such as the Goldsmiths Company Book of Ordinances, as you can see here. The documents can be used to study a wide variety of topics, and some of these research themes are listed here. The depth and chronological range of the records mean that it is possible to use them to study almost any aspect of the city during this pivotal period of its history. We are also commissioning academic essays to explore some of these themes in more depth. Finally, I just want to briefly highlight some of the contextual features that we are including in the resource to help students and researchers navigate the records. These will include a chronology, essays and video interviews, a guide to reading early modern records to help users become more familiar with the handwriting and some of the abbreviations and terms included in the material, thematic guides signposting to some of the key documents, and a guide to archival collections, giving background to the collections and some of their highlights. Module 1 of this exciting resource will be released in December. Thank you very much for listening.
So it looks like, oh, we have had a couple of questions pop in from the first couple of collections that we talked about. So unsurprisingly, it looks like one of the first questions is about apartheid, South Africa, and that is, are there any plans for further modules of this resource? Sophie, I don't suppose you could answer that for me in the meantime?
Yes, well, I mean, the short answer is yes. There is a second module of this latter period coming next year. So where this takes us up to 1988, the second module will then continue on from 1989 all the way through to 1994. So where this kind of earlier part of the latter period covers, you know, resistance and sanctions, the later module is then going to tell the other side of the story, which is the negotiation and the liberation. So, you know, there'll be, you know, the release of Nelson Mandela, as well as then his subsequent election, and kind of, again, seeing that through the lens of the British government perspective, as well as, you know, the first free election. And I think that also the, a lot of organisations finally being legalised again after being banned. So I think that the second module, again, will kind of tell the second part of this story. And yeah, so that'll be next year.
Great. Okay. And Sophie, while I have you, I was wondering, do you have any particular highlights that you might want to mention around the material in apartheid South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I would really recommend that one of the things that I found so fascinating about when I was seeing the material for myself, firstly, is some of the letters from members of the public. So I kind of raised there that basically whole school classes would actually all write letters to Margaret Thatcher, and they would then write it, their names within a petition. And I just found that the strength of feeling, even in like quite young children, a particularly interesting insight that I haven't really come across before, and the fact that it would almost be like a school project. I mean, of course, you then have standard letters from, you know, adults from the constituency, particularly, that will be a lot stronger in feeling. But I just found that a really unusual element to this. And I think in addition, this is maybe a little bit more administrative, but when you go through the files, it's actually a really interesting point in time in terms of the technology. There's lots of different sorts of faxes and paper that is being utilized. And while that sounds quite boring, it's actually technologically a really interesting time where government records and things were being dealt with in really different technological formats, as, you know, computers start to become, you know, are being used, even if it's not widespread, as something that's becoming more adopted. And you can see the old fax system. So again, it's just a time of change and progression, and I think it's just really interesting to see it within that context. And those are just a couple of things that I kind of noted that I think were maybe not as widely discussed, I suppose.
Certainly. Perfect. I do see that we have Rob back in now. Rob, are you able to use your audio? Oh dear, Rob. Unfortunately, I'm unable to hear you at the moment. Okay, what we can do is I can add a recording of Rob's section into this webinar, and I will make it available afterwards. And I do have a line of connection with Rob outside of the webinar as well. So if anybody has any questions for him, I'm sure we can work out a way to answer them in the meantime. I do have another few questions that have come through. So there is one here that I can see around Hindi cinema. So Sarah, if you wouldn't mind answering this, I do have a question. Someone has asked, you've referred to both Bollywood and Hindi cinema in this resource. How do those differ?
Thanks, Dot. Yeah, that's a really good point. So we have, the editorial board has helped us frame Hindi cinema as the best way of describing this particular cinematic tradition. So Bollywood is really a term that came to popularity in the 90s, and it sort of almost follows on from the movie Mahal era, but it's very specific to that era, and it's also somewhat reductive because it's almost framing it as a lesser cousin of Hollywood. So the interesting thing is, of course, that throughout the resource there's going to be scatterings of this use of Bombay, because that's exactly how the interviews through the 80s and 90s and 2000s were positioning it. So, in fact, in the interview we have with Nasreen, she talks about it as like a passport in a way, and it's that foot in the door that allows those of us from outside of that tradition to kind of, we have, oh yes, I know what you mean, I've got that image in my mind. However, it doesn't really do the tradition enough justice, and so Hindi cinema was considered a much more inclusive and respectful term, really, and that's why we're using it. But also why Bollywood still turns up in the terminology. We haven't kind of got rid of it completely.
Certainly. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. There is another one here for you, Sarah, that I'm going to get you to answer just before we jump into some questions for somebody else, which is, how were the interview subjects selected?
Yes, so this really was pretty much down to Nasreen's discretion, and there's a certain amount of getting the ball rolling, I think. So she was very interested in talking to people who'd made a large contribution. So we had said to her, for example, that especially in the earlier interviews, women are rather underrepresented. So kind of, you know, what sort of, where are the women directors? And she said, unfortunately, at that point, that's not what you see in the groups who are making these big influential pictures. So she focuses on the people who are the kind of A-listers of the times. And then it obviously expands from that. And the more that she spoke to individuals, the better known she became, and the more, and she's very much part of that tradition. She does a lot of work with subtitling. She puts on the BFI's Indian film seasons. So she's very much part of that community. And so it's very interesting to have that perspective on kind of her curation of who's been selected. And then there's a lot of, you know, cross-referencing about who they're talking about and the relationships that come through in the interviews, which is really part of the value of the resource, is seeing those relationships and kind of how the network fit together.
Great. Okay, I'm going to move on to a question for Mitchell, which is about Olympic movement. So this question is, given the global nature of the Olympics, how much material in this project offers representation of athletes and organisations from the global south?
Yeah, thank you, Dot. So as you will have seen from the kind of list of archives, the content in the resource does primarily come from sporting organisations and archives from the UK, the USA and Europe. But given the global nature of the Olympics, there's a huge amount of material from sources all over the world. So, for example, we have a series dedicated to individual national Olympic committees. So, for example, in South America, this depicts the origins of NOCs in Argentina and Brazil, detailing the National Olympic Committee leadership, the promotion of sport and training for athletes in those countries. And there's also, I briefly mentioned it, extensive material on different regional games, so the Pan American and Central American games, and the African and Asian games. So these documents reveal the origins and development of each event and how the government officials in those countries worked with the IOC to promote the sport in their nation. And another kind of highlight of those series is the documents related to the games of the new emerging forces. These took place between 1962 and 1967 and were set up by Indonesia almost as a counter to the Olympics after the suspension of Indonesia from the IOC. And it was established for athletes of the emerging nations, so mainly newly independent socialist states. And these series depict correspondence between organisers of the event and members of the IOC. So there is a kind of wealth of material from across the globe.
Hopefully that answers your question. And Mitchell, there is another one here, which is whether there's any material on sports science and medicine during the 20th century.
Yes, so we are very fortunate to be including some material from the International Olympic Committee Medical Commission. So this depicts some of the early developments in things like drug testing. So there's minutes and correspondence from the 1976 Montreal Games with discussions of kind of the early drug testing process, including proposals for acceptance of different types of tests and labs to fight against doping. and different scientific training methods involved in the drug testing process. And also, as early as 1936, there are documents on the origins of sex and gender testing in the Olympics. So development of chromosomal and so-called femininity tests that were required on arrival at the Olympic Village. So a lot of the documents kind of correspond to themes that are hugely important today as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So let me have a look at some of the other questions that we have had through. Okay, we've got one here on East India Company. You've mentioned Singapore and Malaysia here, but could you tell us if there are any other countries covered, particularly within the F series? Eleanor, I wonder if you could answer that for us.
No problem. So the territories controlled by the East India Company are primarily in Asia in the resource. So they are talking primarily about what we would recognise now as India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Burma. Singapore and Malaysia form up what were and are known as the East India Straits settlements, which are part of that primary territory. But what is in the material, it goes far beyond the bounds of what the EIC would recognise as its territory. There are discussions about trade in China, conflict in what is described as Turkish Arabia in the documents, but what we would recognise as modern day Iraq and Iran, as well as references to piracy off the coast of Madagascar, specifically by a South American ship. So what is being discussed is global, and the EIC and their influence was definitely beyond the territory that they had in India, and then it definitely goes beyond that in the documents. So we wanted to focus in on Singapore and Malaysia, particularly because they can be sort of neglected in favour of the larger territory of India. And Fiona, who wrote our essay on the environment, was very excited to be able to discuss the impact that they've had on that region, and how that's still ongoing today with what's happening now.
Perfect. I know that I have spoken to academics at the National University of Singapore who are currently using East India Company records in interdisciplinary courses between marine biology and history as well. So definitely more to dig into there. I'm also going to come to Sophie Phone. Sophie, I was wondering, now this is a personal question from myself, but do you have any favourites in the shopping project?
I'll start. Yeah, it's hard to choose, but I think the House of Fraser archives from University of Glasgow is a really rich source for me personally. I think what makes this collection so unique is that House of Fraser acquired the archives of several other stores as the company grew over the 20th century. And so the archives include really great regional coverage of UK stores, but they also hold the records of Army and Navy, who had outlets in Calcutta and Delhi. And records of this particular store provide an insight into British colonial business operations, and their catalogues reveal how goods were marketed and exported to colonised places. So to support this content, we're also including the receipts of Sophia Dulut Singh from the British Library. And Sophia was an Indian princess whose father was exiled to England after his kingdom was annexed by the British in the 1840s, and she actually shopped at Army and Navy. So her receipts provide an insight into both her lifestyle and customer experience of shopping at the store. And so what we've been aiming to do with this resource is bring together these different archival collections across different places with those connections to provide a cross-searchable platform for users to explore those records. So yeah, lots to explore in that archive.
Certainly. Okay, perfect. Just thinking, obviously, I know there's plenty of Canadian content in the transformation of shopping as well. And so I did want to highlight, just as One final reminder for everyone who is here at the moment that we run webinars on a regular basis. If you're interested in signing up for our Canadian content webinar next week, you would be able to find that in our Insights section where the webinars are all listed here, and you can see the content around Canada is on next Thursday, and in order to sign up for that one, you would just click the Register Now button inside that webpage. And if you missed last week's webinar or you would like to watch the recording of either webinar, both of those can be found in that Insights section of our website. Thank you ever so much for attending. If you have any further questions, then please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. And once again, that can be done through our website, where you should be able to use any of the contact forms. I'd recommend going through support, for instance, and you can just let us know what that query is, and we would love to help. Thank you very much. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.